What is your opinion on tariffs? Do you feel that it's more posturing in order to get certain parties to come to the table for negotiations, or do you really think or predict that this could go through?
To me, tariffs should be targeted and temporary if they exist at all, and they ought to exist to be able to deal with unfair trading practices. With regard to Trump, he uses tariffs in other ways. He uses the threat of tariffs as a way to get people to do things that he wants them to do using economic leverage. He used the threat of tariffs in order to try to get more control of the southern and northern border, to stop the flow of illegal immigrants, to stop the flow of illegal drugs, if you will. Those tariffs have been temporarily suspended. Hopefully things will be worked out so we won't have to impose them, if you will. The United States, believe it or not, used to run the entire federal government on tariffs until the late 1800s. But the world is a totally different place today than the late 1800s.
I'm Garrett Wong, and this is the Investing to Win podcast. How do you define success, and what does winning look like for you? Debt is climbing, inflation's out of control, and faith in fiscal policy is crumbling. So how did we get here? And more importantly, how do we fix it? My guest today has some powerful insights. David Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States, served under 3 different presidents. He spent his career advocating for fiscal responsibility and pushing for reforms to get America's finances back on track. And this conversation couldn't be more timely. The national debt and economic uncertainty are growing threats to future generations, and we're reaching a tipping point. Plus, President Trump recently announced a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports, hitting countries like Canada and Mexico. Are we headed for a trade war that will cripple both countries? Today, David and I will dig deep into the strategies governments need to regain control of their finances. We'll also talk about how the principles of fiscal responsibility apply to businesses and personal finances. All right, Dave, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Good to be with you, Garrett.
Yeah, so I'm just going to bullet point your a little bit about you, just so because I want to talk about other things because I think people can read about you. But former Comptroller General of the United States, led the U.S. Government Accountability Office, expert in fiscal responsibility, known as the Paul Revere of fiscal responsibility, corporate leadership, served as a partner and global managing director, Arthur Anderson, government service, held roles, Assistant Secretary of Labor for Pension and Welfare, Public Trustee for Social Security and Medicare, author of several books, but notably Come Back America, Turning the Century Around and Restoring Fiscal Responsibility. Lots here, educator, distinguished visiting professor at the U.S. Naval Academy, and obviously the media presence. I saw you in LA with JT Fox, and I just wanted to have you on the podcast. You've had a unique vantage point in overseeing fiscal policy. What do you feel your role now, then it helped shape what you see happen or saw happening in the nation at that time?
Well, as Comptroller General of the United States, I was basically the Auditor General of the United States, the Chief Accountability Officer of the United States, and the Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Government Accountability Office. And we did a lot of work to try to help improve the performance and accountability of the government for the benefit of the American people. We made, many, many recommendations that got implemented. We generated $110 of return for every dollar invested in the agency, and made a number of other improvements. But I will tell you that while I accomplished all but one of my objectives when I was Comptroller General, I didn't accomplish one, and that was to try to get the Congress and the President to work together to start putting our finances in order. And I'm sad to say that it's gotten a lot worse since I left than it was when I was there. And so I spend a lot of my time trying to educate and engage the people on the truth about where we are, where we're headed, how we compare to others, and then what do we need to do to put our finances in order, which is critical if we want our collective future to be better than our past. And if we want to remain a superpower, which is what my latest book is, American 2040, Still a Superpower, ?
Right. No, absolutely. I think what's happening right now at the recording of this podcast, which is interesting if we had done this back a couple months ago, is the subject of tariffs. And not to get political, because I consider myself more as I think you might be, as I've read, politically agnostic because we care more about fiscal responsibility and what, whatever governing party is going to be in power. Having said that, what is your opinion on tariffs between different countries? Let's say I'm in Canada, you're in the US. And do you feel that it's more posturing in order to get certain parties to come to the table for negotiations, or do you really think or predict that this could go through?
Well, first, let's talk about tariffs as an issue. Then let's talk about President Trump, how he uses it. I mean, to me, tariffs should be targeted and temporary if they exist at all, and they ought to exist to be able to deal with unfair trading practices, where we're not in a level playing field. The one possible exception would be for national security reasons, that that we need to maintain a domestic capacity for certain things, for example, steel production. And we need to make sure that we do that, and tariffs can come in order to deal with an unlevel playing field in that regard. But in general, you want to promote free trade to the maximum extent that you can. You also want reciprocity. For example, if somebody's taxing our cars at 10%, then and we're only taxing them at 2, that's not exactly reciprocity, okay? With regard to Trump, he uses tariffs in other ways. He uses the threat of tariffs, okay, as a way to get people to do things that he wants them to do using economic leverage. For example, in the case of Canada, which is where you are, okay, in the case of Mexico, he used the threat of tariffs in order to try to get more control of the southern and northern border, to stop the flow of illegal immigrants, to stop the flow of illegal drugs, if you will. Those tariffs have been temporarily suspended. Hopefully, things will be worked out so we won't have to impose them, if you will. He uses it to try to get other countries to do things, whether it's to try to be able to contribute more towards more their of economy towards defense, okay, or to deal with the threat of the BRICS nations who are working against U.S. and Western interests, if you will. So Trump is very a-traditional. The United States, believe it or not, used to run the entire federal government on tariffs until the late 1800s. But the world is a totally different place today
Right.
than the late 1800s.
Yeah, no, that's well said. I mean, it's interesting to me because Trump, like love him or hate him, is I believe trying to run the country the way he's always run his businesses, and that brings me to my next point. And this is an age-old, debate. But what is your personal opinion on government and fiscal responsibility, and should governments be running the government like a business?
Well, the government is not a business, although there are, business practices that can apply to government. A business, although has, metrics, some very clear metrics. You have market share, you have revenues, you have gross margin, you have, net profit, you have return on investment, shareholder, et cetera. All right, it's easier. It's actually easier. Business also tends to have a plan. They tend to also have outcome-based metrics that they're measuring their progress and how they're doing, as compared to their plan and their competitors. Government doesn't have that. Believe it or not, the federal government's been in business in the United States since 1789. We still don't have a consolidated, outcome-based, resource-constrained plan. We don't have key national indicators for economics, for diplomatic, for military, and for domestic issues, to be able to understand what are we doing, how are we doing, how do we compare to others. So as a result, we're flying blind in mountains of debt without an instrument panel. That's not too smart, right? So these are examples of things that I'm trying to fight to get corrected, which is necessary not only to be able to generate more economy, efficiency, and effectiveness in the short term, but to be able to put our finances in order over time so our future can be better than our past.
What do you feel personally is the top 3 things that we need to do, America needs to do in the next 10 years in order to achieve that?
Well, the number one thing is we've got to put our finances in order, because no country is exempt from the laws of prudent finance. We've lost control of our finances. Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency can make a down payment in that. We're going to have a statutory fiscal commission. We're going to need a constitutional amendment that limits how much debt as a percentage of the economy. There are other issues that people care about right now. Border security's a big issue right now. Crime's a big issue right now. Obviously, we were concerned about inflation. It's come down, but we don't want it to rear its ugly head again, if you will. We're concerned about international stability. There's much more international instability right now than there was 4 years ago. We need to get that under control. But if you don't put your finances in order, nothing else will matter over time.
Yeah, no, I think that's true in any business, any family situation. We don't have a ton of time here, and I like to finish off the podcast with one question, and I want to hear what you have to say. So, how do you define success, and what does winning look like for you, even personally?
Well, to me, I've always believed in public service. I've also believed that life is about making a difference, not about making money. I think that, once you have enough resources, then it's what can you do to try to help create a better future, if you will. And so I've been very fortunate. I've had significant responsibilities in the private sector, the public sector, and the not-for-profit sector. And I'm continuing to fight for our country's future and our family's future. And I feel good about it.
All right. Well said. Well, thank you for your service. Just an amazing, amazing wealth of knowledge. And I really applaud you for your vision. Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks, Garrett. Good to see you.
All right. Likewise.